Welcome to the SaaS AdLab podcast, where we bring to you the stories of SaaS founders, entrepreneurs, and CEOs. My name is Luis. I'm the owner and founder of Fantôm Agency, a digital marketing agency specializing in scaling SaaS companies. And today we have the pleasure of interviewing Krish, co-founder of FireFlies.ai. And thank you for taking the time today out of your day to spend a little bit more time with us, telling us a little bit more about your product, how you found the right product, and really understanding, what was something that was missing in the market, and how to build something around that pain point, right? So again, thank you for being here. And I do want to mention before we get into anything else, Krish was kind enough to provide us with free credits. So anytime that you join FireFlies.ai, they'll give you a number of credits for free that you can use up. And there will be a link for that in the descriptions, so you can go ahead and try that out. And Krish, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to talk more about our background, the platform, and I think it's great what you guys are doing. So props to you guys for setting all this up.
Appreciate it.
Where should we start? Maybe a little bit about me, right? So my background is I was a product manager back at Microsoft. I've founded this company with someone else. So that is my co-founder, Sam. He was at MIT doing a lot of deep learning and machine learning stuff. And we got together and we started this company about a year and a half ago.
Awesome.
And it's been quite a journey. And what Fireflies does, quite simply, is a conversation tracking platform. And what that means is it joins your meetings and sales calls and automatically records, transcribes, captures them, and then logs them into the systems that you already use today. So whether it's your CRM like Salesforce, whether it's another application like Slack, and we basically help unify all your communication and conversations and capture those for your team. And as you can imagine, if you're having sales calls, you're having lots of them probably, and it's super important to be able to look back at those calls, analyze them, and figure out what you need to do for your follow-up calls and things like that. But yeah, just a conversation tracking platform. Anything that has to do with sales calls or meetings will be there.
That's awesome. That's a great product. And I was just telling you before the meeting, essentially, some of the things that you have to do before, you're able to take on a different project or a different product. Sorry. So for example, whether it's recording a phone call via Evernote or just a good old, like a little recorder thing, whatever it needs to be. But essentially it's extremely important, right? To really understand what the phone call is about. And this is something that I've been, that I've dealt with in the past, where essentially you're on a phone call and there's just a lot of moving pieces where you kind of forget about, or you're focused on something else, and the individual's already talking about the next 3 points ahead of you, right? And you're still thinking on the last one. And if you don't have a software like Fireflies, right, you're kind of missing some of that information that could be very, very crucial to whether it's a deal or whatever it may be with a customer or with a client, right? So again, I think the product is amazing, and it's really hitting on a pain point that a lot of businesses really, have, where they're missing these key details in phone calls and things like that. So it's an awesome product. Props for finding, the right product in the market to make this. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about that? So essentially, how did you find product market fit, and where does that all fall into place?
Sure. For us, it had to do with a lot more of opening up the platform, seeing how people were using it, and then being able to determine based on certain usage patterns and identifying what customer segments are really getting value out of this, right? And who are the power users, and trying to identify if we could bring more of those type of people back to the platform. And what that really comes down to is two things, right? Is like, what is the problem you're solving, and is the solution that you're providing them 10x enough for them to adopt it and change whatever existing behavior they have. When it comes to product market fit, a lot of times you're thinking you're competing with competitors, but in reality, you're competing with people's laziness, right? They don't want to change. They don't want to be able to do something else unless it's going to make their life 10 times better. Mm-hmm. And for us, we started looking at a lot of folks, especially folks in the sales domain and customer support domain, folks like yourself that are in front of customers talking to lots of people. And we noticed, right, they're having back-to-back calls. They'll be jumping from one Zoom call to the next, and they're never able to log information inside their CRM. And whether they're using a small, medium-sized CRM like Pipedrive or Zoho, or whether they're using a large enterprise CRM like Salesforce, that common is uniform across all sorts of salespeople because, they're spending majority of their time trying to have these conversations, and data entry is the last thing that they want to worry about.
Mhm.
And then also when you're in the call itself, right, you don't want to be scrambling to take notes and trying to listen and then trying to think of a response to say. It's too hard. We're terrible at multitasking.
Mhm.
And so one of the things we started doing was asking our power users, right, why are you using this? And why would you complain if we like turn this off tomorrow and you could never access it? And that came down to two key things. One was, hey, it lets me stay present in the meeting, and it lets me actually think about, listening to those people and come up with thoughtful responses. And I don't have to worry about having to like remember stuff and write things down. That's all taken care of for me. The second value part is, as I use Fireflies more and more, it becomes more valuable to me because I'm able to go back and search all my past calls. So if I've had 50 calls in the last 2 months, I could use Fireflies to go back and search that exact call where I was talking about, a particular integration, for example, right? And go down to the specific minute and the timestamp and know exactly what was said. And that's extremely valuable for me because a lot of the deals that I do require 2 to 3 phone calls before I close them, and it requires a lot of follow-ups. And in order for me to do a good job of personalizing my follow-ups, I need to remember what was said on those calls, and I want to be able to hop back in and actually look at those. And using those 2 core value drivers, we started figuring out, okay, how do we build a platform that's simple enough, the user experience is clear enough, and we're not trying to like overcomplicate things for users. And that, coupled with really good onboarding, was really important for us to get that message across, and then just start cranking the wheel. And then as you start seeing more people adopt the platform in that manner, it ended up helping us a lot in terms of being able to see usage, and then get these guys to essentially, they get hooked on the platform and they don't want to stop using it. And that's when you've had that product market fit.
That's awesome. That's a lot of insight into, what it really takes to figure out whether you have it or not. And I think you touched on a lot of really good points, and essentially, finding the pain points, and I'm interested in understanding a little bit more about what kind of churn Fireflies is currently looking at, right? Essentially, and like you said, I think a product like this becomes, after, a certain period of time, it becomes so essential that not having it turns into a pain point again, right? So you're going back to essentially having to keep doing all these things manually, or having to go to, like you said, a competitor or something like that. But the biggest thing is really the laziness that you touched on. And a lot of people, when you really make someone's life easier, that's when they're hooked. And so that's why I want to know what does churn look like, if there's even any at this point?
Yeah, I think we're, further along enough to that where we can start talking about churn, and it is, low single digits, and that's typical for SMB sort of SaaS products. For us, churn is less of a concern, and I think churn is usually a lagging indicator. The leading indicator we look at when we think about metrics is dormancy, and that was a huge thing we wanted to solve. And one of the things that we did was, right, like Fireflies, people will use it in a few meetings, they'll feel like it's great, and then people tend to forget about it, right? You might have like 40 apps on your phone, for example, but you only really use 5 apps.
Yeah.
Similarly, you might have like 10 web subscriptions, but you're really using only a few sites. And for us, we wanted to set the value around usage and engagement, and that was very key for us. And some of the things we did to improve that, right, and ultimately this also improves fixing churn and other things, was getting people to use it in as many meetings as possible without even having to think about it. So we enabled a feature where you connect it to your calendar, and anywhere in the calendar where there's a web conferencing system or a dial-in for a meeting, it automatically can join that call and capture it for you. So people don't have to constantly think about inviting our assistant to meetings like via email. Like we have our assistant's ID is Fred at FireFlies.ai. And so people could manually invite it to meetings. But when we turn on this auto join feature, usage went through the roof, and then stickiness went through the roof, because we were solving that laziness aspect, because people are lazy even just to invite our assistant to a meeting. And so for us, that was one of the big things we did to solve dormancy early on in our progress. And the other value is, now that you've gotten the base barrier to entry out of the way, now you can start thinking about, how do I engage with people or customers based on how they're using it. And so we look at different things like how often are they routing it to different integrations? How are they able to essentially look back and review and search and do all that stuff? And we start tracking a bunch of these soft signals. But ultimately, how many meetings can we get them to get it in? And also, if you notice, our pricing is very much aligned towards usage and engagement. Because if you use it, that's only when we get paid. And that's kind of the value system that we have with the system or with our customers. And I think that's really helped align all of our engineering team and all of our marketing and design folks to start thinking more about the one and only true thing that mattered to us was like, how do we get these guys to use it as often as possible and derive value from it without having to think too much about it? And fixing that eventually fixes that lagging indicator, which is churn.
That's awesome. And so now that you give me a little bit more about, the product and how it really works with especially with that pretty much automated system, right, where it joins the call. And at the beginning of the call, we had another phone number in this meeting, and I didn't know what you meant by that. You said that Fireflies joined the meeting, and I honestly, I was kind of lost. I didn't necessarily I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. So essentially that's what that is. So we have Fireflies currently in the meeting, listening to everything that we're saying, transcribing everything. And then later today, when the meeting's over, Krish is going to have everything, every single detail of this meeting, this, conference, whatever you want to call it, on whatever CRM you use, which is pretty, honestly, it's kind of mind blowing, to be honest. And I think it's awesome. Because I never really thought of it that way, but now that it kind of happened and it happened in the back of my head without me even thinking about it, that was really cool. That was pretty awesome, to be honest. So thank you for that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool. Because Fireflies shows up on time to meetings. I had the habit of, I showed up a little late. We all tend to do that. So it's really refreshing to know that, okay, who's that thing on the call? It's always going to be Fireflies. Is going to be one of the first people on the call. So that's usually a really cool thing. And then also, this is what happens, right? The product sells itself because I'm able to talk to people when I have my meetings, and then afterwards,
they're asking you about it.
Yeah, they ask about it, and I tell them too, hey, this call is being recorded, by the way. I have this AI thing that we build. I don't even talk about my company. I just say, hey, I'm using this AI thing to record our call. Is that okay with you? Otherwise, I'll boot it off the call. And then they're like, oh, tell me a little bit about it. And then afterwards, I'm like, you know what? Let me actually send you what it caught from the meeting, and then there it is. Like I've, influenced someone to purchase the product or use the product without having to sell them, right? Because I fundamentally believe that people want to be able to make that purchasing decision on their own, or feel like they're going to get value out of it and then make it. And so I'm not a big believer in that you have to do a fancy sale and a demo to be able to convince these people to purchase this product. And that also reflects in the way we built our company. And so we feel like you buy because you see it in action and you see value from it. So it's great that you mentioned it, because now you're like, oh, let me go check this out after this call.
I was then, and it actually, before the call even started, before you joined, and maybe this was what happened. So I was sitting here, and then it seemed like someone joined the meeting, and I started saying hello, and I didn't get anything, and I'm guessing that's what it was. I have no idea.
Yeah.
So
we'll do a better job of having Fred, talk to you during the meeting. That could be a cool feature. We'll say, hey, by the way, Krish hasn't joined yet, but I'm an AI assistant. What's up?
That'd be super awesome. But no, that was definitely a pretty, honestly, an eye-opening experience on what the product really is and how it works, right? And this was before I really understood what this, what it was, I guess. It was kind of weird, but cool in a good way. So that's awesome. And essentially, one of the things I want to talk about too is the background, right, of the product. So you're fixing this pain point that a lot of people have, especially in the sales industry and things like that. So how did you find that this was the case?
Yeah, I think that, from my background, I'm from an engineering, product management background, so I don't have sales experience necessarily. Both my co-founder and I are both from an engineering background. And I had this pain because when I was at Microsoft, I had tons and tons of meetings, right? And then my job was to have these meetings, manage them, get everyone on the same page after meetings. I'm like, oh, I wish I could just join that meeting, take notes, and then I don't have to do it. They'll go and look at that transcript, and then they'll know what they need to do, right? Makes my job easier. That was the angle we came from. And I think today we still have a large segment of users that still use it for internal meetings and things like that, consulting meetings, client meetings, and things like that, right? But what we realized is, once we started, iterating on a bunch of products and started selling and doing other things, we had to get on calls, right? We had to get on calls with a bunch of people, and I could not remember, like, what was it that I said on that call? Now I wish I could remember. Like, I need that information because otherwise I can't close this deal or I can't follow up with this person. And it became a pain point. And then we started digging deeper into, I'm actually using Fireflies more on my sales and customer calls, more than I'm using it on my internal meetings. And why is that? And so we started really focusing on that use case. It's not that today people can't go and use it on an internal meeting. All types of users use it, but we tend to focus more on the use case and the value prop around customer calls, and also the value, right? Like, think about how much money you spend, right, if you're an organization, on trying to do marketing to get a lead and then get them on a demo, and then have that sales call, right? So you're spending already a ton of money acquiring this lead. You're paying agencies, you're doing all sorts of things. You're running Facebook campaigns, Google AdWords, and you get one shot at having this conversation with people. And you get that one shot at recording and capturing that call. And a lot of times, right, let's say you spent $50 trying to get that person through the door and have a call with you, and then it just was a so-so call and you didn't remember a single thing. And you just wasted $50 right there, right? And maybe what Fireflies cost is like $1 for that call, for capturing that call for you. But that data is infinitely valuable because whether that deal closes or not, you now have information that you can use to empower everyone on your team, on figuring out, how do I close this account, or how do I essentially understand what's working, what's not working. So for us, right, the way we found this value problem was when we got into hyper sales mode and started selling our own product, we realized that this was a huge pain point. And then we started, living in the shoes of what like a sales rep or an SDR or an account executive does on a day-to-day basis. And we realized, wow, we're doing this almost like 40% of our time because we're doing engineering and all these other things. But think about a rep where from, morning till evening, every single day, they just got to grind, right? And I feel like salespeople have some of the strongest like work ethic and hustle that you'll ever see. But, we can make their life a little bit easier. And so I had a bunch of friends that were sales reps, from SDRs to AEs, started talking to them. And I started talking to managers about, okay, like, what are your biggest pain points with your reps? And they always say two things, right? I want my reps to be more productive and stop wasting time doing other things. Two is I want to make sure I have better oversight into what the heck's happening in my business. And my CRM is only as good as what data is in there, right? Whether I want to do pipelines, projections, forecasting, and this is usually for larger orgs, right? When they're starting to think more about the funnel. And none of that can be done if your reps aren't entering data into the CRM. So it's like a win-win for both reps. Like, hey, this saves me a ton of time. My manager doesn't have to nag me about putting stuff into my CRM. And then from managers' perspective, I can use this data to on my one-on-ones to coach them, to train them, to actually figure out forecasts. And when we come up with, scores of, hey, how likely is this deal going to close? They can't BS you now. You have the exact information you need to know that if it's actually going to close or it's, less likely to close, and have that information. And it just keeps everyone in check and accountable. Yeah.
That's
Hopefully
awesome.
That answered your question about, we were doing it ourselves. We felt the pain point. And then we started talking to other friends that were doing this on a full-time basis. And then we got it in their hands. And then we started talking up the food chain to managers. And then that's how we found out, okay, holy crap, there's value here beyond just recording a call and transcribing it. There's value enriching CRMs and building workflows and use cases that allow teams to do much more on top of the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of different scenarios where this could be a useful product, right? Essentially, I mean, there's so many things that happen on a sales call or whatever you want to call it. And one of the things that I thought about is, really finding the how is this product going to give me a return on my investment, right? And so you touched on the fact that the pricing model is based on usage. So essentially, I'm not entirely sure of how it's working at the moment, right? But for example, let's say that you have one sales call and that's, I don't know, 5 credits, whatever it is. Then that one sales call, now you have all the information that you need to close it, because essentially it's just taking whatever information the prospects gave you and positioning it, framing it, right? So that you can then come in as the expert or whatever it is. And sometimes it's things as simple as, for example, having when you're talking, I think one of the things that gets missed on a lot of sales calls is being more personable and really, being a little bit more, what's the right word? I guess just more intimate with whoever you're talking, right? And sometimes when you first get on the phone call, you're talking about little details like building rapport, right? Earlier on the call, whether it's, oh, what did you do this weekend? You hang out with your family and things like that. And you can use things like that later on in the phone call that you're not going to remember unless you have everything written out. And essentially to, like you said, sales reps, they're having calls back to back to back to back. And it's not even the fact that they can't write every single thing down, but also the fact that they can get things mixed up. And I'm talking about this specific person, right? Maybe she has a daughter or something, right? And then you're talking to someone else and maybe she's a widow. And if you get, or maybe she lost her daughter and maybe it's not something you want to bring up, and mix and match because it's totally going to ruin the call. And it's not because the deal didn't work out, or it's just because of a simple personal detail about that specific individual that just, made you lose the deal. So again, there's a lot of really cool ways to look at Fireflies and really understand, where it can be a successful product for many, many people.
Yeah, that's really cool. Actually, we had a couple of customers where, you would think everything's about budget and, who's the owner, what's the timeline, next steps, these sort of stuff. But we've had people come back to me and tell me, hey, on one of the calls, we were actually talking about, we both had the same dog and we ended up building rapport based on that. And then I used that on the next follow-up calls, or I personalized my emails based on that. That actually created a higher open rate, and then being able to get back a response from these people and then actually eventually closing the sale. And I think we're seeing this movement in sales as well as a whole, like the macro trend, where we've had all these automation tools when it comes to engaging, right? Where you send out a bunch of cold emails, drip campaigns, open rates become extremely low. And we're seeing this shift back to, you've got to personalize. And that's where you have this whole trend around account-based marketing, account-based sales, where you have to strategically personalize, right? You have to personalize at scale somewhere or the other. And the best way to personalize is really having a genuine conversation with your prospects and leads, and being able to then use that, right, and do solution selling based on what pain points that they have. And I think that's extremely critical. And I'm glad we're able to help people personalize more. Yeah. And for us, we think that sales software and like AI that we're working on can really help in the back office, in the back end, doing the administrative grunt work. I still think sales conversations themselves, the actual calls, the emails, the touch points is a very still human thing. And replacing and automating humans there, I think, is the wrong focus, because having that is extremely important in order to be able to do, these sort of things. And I think that we're helping people have better conversations. I think ultimately that leads to everything you said about better rapport and ultimately closing deals. Yeah,
absolutely. And yeah, I mean, and everything, revolves around, and this is something that's been touched on ever since one individual brought it up in another podcast, and it's creating things that are not scalable, or doing things that are not scalable. And this is something that I recently heard, in the SaaS industry, and I feel like I wasn't necessarily aware of it before, but it's true, and it struck me really hard. And I literally just talked about this in the past podcast that I did earlier, but essentially you're able to do, with Fireflies, something that is not scalable, like remembering tons of details of every single person that you speak to, and make it a little bit more scalable, right? It's not going to be right. It's not going to help you remember it, but it's going to be there so that you can go back and look at it, go back and listen to that specific point in time, or read it, right? Going back and I'm not entirely sure how the product works entirely and what sort of the features are, right? But you did mention that you could go back to a specific minute or whatever time frame and listen to a specific point. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can. So we actually give you a way to be able to go back and search all your calls And that's something where you can go back, re-listen to the call at the exact time frame, or you can actually go back and read the transcript. You can also click on any part of the transcript and then listen to exactly what was said, because many times it's one thing reading the transcript and searching through the transcript, and then there's another huge value add being able to actually listen to how it was said, what was said.
Absolutely.
How it is said is sometimes just as important, if not more, than what exactly was said. So we have all those capabilities, and then we have a bunch of things around smart search. So there are things where we can let you search specifically to when they're talking about pricing, right? Or when they're talking about discounts, when they're talking about dates and times, when they're talking about metrics, all sorts of things. And then we have our own custom AI models. Like, for example, if you go to our dashboard and you don't want to read that entire transcript or listen to it, you can click a filter and it'll filter through and suggest you, these are all the action items from the call, right? If I said something like, let me send you the slides after this meeting, or I'll send out the contract by next Friday, it'll go highlight those things. And so if I'm a manager, if I'm a rep, I know exactly, like, within 5 minutes, what are the key takeaways from that call versus having to sit and re-listen to a 30-minute call.
Oh man, that is so awesome. I'm just selling myself right now. No, this is literally like one of the coolest products I've had on the podcast. So yeah, it's super, I think, I don't know how to describe it, to be honest. I just think it's super, like, revolutionary, or whatever the word you want to use for that, right? But yeah, that's awesome, man. And essentially, what's been let's talk a little bit more about, the growth of the company and what's been taking place in that sense. So what's been one of the most successful things as far as getting people to actually find out about you guys?
Yeah, so if we look at top of the funnel, right? Up to this point, everything has been organic, and I think that's really credit to how the team has thought through acquisition. It's acquired through folks that are sharing it with their friends, sharing with their colleagues. We had this really crazy trend where we had a company in Atlanta, Georgia, like one person was using it. Within a week, we had like a dozen people using it. And within a month, we had 4 surrounding companies that did business with that one company end up using it, and people within those companies using it. I think meetings are naturally viral, and people being able to also say, hey, this call is being recorded. It's being recorded by this tool. That helped spread it a lot. And I've gone into meetings, or I've gone into events where I say, oh, I work on this company called FireFlies. Why does that name sound familiar? Oh, it was on one of my calls I had with someone last week. So for us, I think ultimately the best sort of marketing or growth is word of mouth marketing. That's how a lot of consumer companies grow. And I think it's still true in B2B SaaS today, because a lot of people bring their own devices to work. You have, companies like Dropbox that were able to just spread because everyone was already using it. And then they're like, hey, manager, you should just use this. This is how Slack spread. And so we're really big believers in letting the product do the talking. And a lot of times that makes it easier too, when we're trying to explain what the product does. It's like, you've already seen what the product does, right? And like, how it works. You've experienced it before you even thought about using it or buying it. And I think that's been like the key for us. And then we're starting to look at, deeper focus on different integration channels, building richer integrations and letting, right? For example, if you're a Zoho CRM user or a Fresh Sales CRM user or a Copper CRM user, and you use Zoom or you use WebEx, that's perfect. Fireflies connects to all those platforms. So if I'm a WebEx and a Copper user, or if I'm a Zoom and a Fresh Sales user, or if I'm a Google Meet and Zoho user, we support all different combinations, right? And it's really interesting because if you think about it, folks within an organization, some will use Zoom, some will use some other web conferencing platform. And we basically integrate with every single business web conferencing platform out there on the market. And we integrate with a host of CRMs. So it's like a lot of mixing and matching. And that also helps a lot, because like people come and say, oh, this is my workflow. These are the tools I use. Can Fireflies get involved into those tools? And they do. So those have been the 2 levers, like word of mouth, people seeing it in action, right? And then being able to just be very, very flexible in terms of integrating with people's workflows and the tools that they use today.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And as far as, let's talk a little bit more about the ugly parts of entrepreneurship and startups and things like that. So
My favorite, yes. The truth needs to be told. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So with all this, growth and success and really, being able to see all these great things happening, there's obviously, and there's always going to be something to balance it out, right? Whether we like it or not, I feel like. So what are some of the things that you've encountered that have been, some of the hardest things really to overcome as this journey has happened?
Yeah. Let's see. There's two, I think, there's a couple places, right? Let's look on the engineering side of things. 2 years ago, this probably might not have been feasible. The technology wasn't mature enough. So there was this huge problem around, is the technology where it needs to be? And then this other concept of, can we scale this, right? Fireflies might be on this call, but it could possibly be on like 500 other calls, right? How do you support and scale infrastructure like that? It's not something you hack up over a weekend, right? And then you start like saying, hey, everyone use it. It's not like a Chrome extension or some quick hack that you can build. There has to be serious thought put into how you build your microservices, how you build your containers, how do you actually have failover, and especially because these calls are happening in real time. If it's lost, right? And so thinking about scale was such a huge thing for us. There would be nights where we'd wake up, especially my co-founder would wake up at 2 a.m., restart servers, start like doing all that hustle. And we really look at engineering success by how many incidents do we have to deal with where we have to wake up in the middle of the night, and that number is going down more and more recently. So that's been really good. And for us, scale and infrastructure is a huge aspect of building this business. And I say it over and over again. Yes, the machine learning, deep learning, and all the AI neural network stuff we do. But ultimately, right, you need a stable, reliable system, right, before you can even put all those things into play. And I think that's been a huge, it's like chipping away at the problem, because there's always going to be bugs and edge cases and things like that. So what I would suggest to founders and other SaaS folks is, the product is going to be ugly on day one, right? But you got to do whatever it takes to push it out the door as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you're going to be building forever. And you need to be able to be okay with it. If you're like a perfectionist, to be, okay, I know those bugs, I know those issues are there, but are we solving the core use case and getting it out to people as quickly as possible? And then chipping away at the problem. People have this temptation to build more features, whereas instead of focusing on that core 2 or 3 features and making that really refined, and it's tempting, right? Because what you tend to realize is, oh, I would get a customer if I built this and if I built that. And then what you end up having is you end up having like a ton of features. And from an engineering side, maintaining those features and sustaining those features and making them bug-free is a huge pain. And so you actually start incurring debt from your engineering cycles in terms of being able to do that. So that's from the engineering side, one of the bigger challenges, right? The other challenge I would say is, especially in the early days, how do you get your first 10 customers? How do you get, your first 5 customers at least? And how do you make sure that they're successful and really, really engaged versus they signed up, they're like so lukewarm? I think the worst thing you can have is like a bunch of customers that are like, this is okay. And it took us a long time to find that use case where people were like obsessed and using it a lot, where calls are inherently valuable. I'm not saying it's not valuable in internal meetings, but to be honest, a lot of internal meetings are just where people tend to have like, if that meeting doesn't happen, you're getting paid to have another meeting, right? Especially at large corporate companies. Whereas when I talked about sales calls, you mess up on that call or you lose information from that call, it's like over, right? So the stakes are a lot higher. There's value, associated with it. And a lot of times it's not about changing the product, but changing the segment you're going after and then changing the pitch for that segment. So you might have a great product, but it might be lukewarm for a certain customer segment. Then you need to step back and start thinking about, do I need to change my technology or do I need to change my customer? And a lot of times it's easier to change your customer than to go back and rebuild your entire technology.
No, that makes completely sense. And as far as you touching on finding the right customer a couple of times. So what is your ideal customer essentially? Are you niched down or are you taking, a wide variety of industries?
Yeah. Awesome. I think you can break this into the size of the customer, the role, and then the domain and industry, like however you want to segment it. For us, right, we started super focused, or actually we started super broad, and then we started zooming in, and that was the right thing to do. And we started looking at customers that were typically actually all the scale of like SMB, small teams, all the way up to enterprise initially. And then we started finding a lot more success, in the SMB segment, because our product is something anyone can go try and use and then go pay for it. So a lot of the SMBs are much easier adoption, just getting through the funnel. As we start scaling, we're eventually going to get to teams where it is going to hit mid-market, high enterprise level deals. But the conversations there are fundamentally different. So you need to realize, are you okay with really long sales cycles and going through security, going through procurement, dealing with all that crap? It's absolutely necessary, but it is, if you're an early stage company, it's really, really tough, right? And so think about, do you have the resources to invest in that? And some people do, right? Some people only do enterprise top down. And then there's companies that go bottoms up. We're definitely a bottoms up company. And then we have, large organizations, people within it, or departments within it using it, which are all great signs. But a lot of our focus is on making the reps extremely successful, the frontline managers extremely successful, and then going from there. And then we start diving even deeper into, we are a workflow product, right? So we work with tools and systems that people use. So if you're using Google Calendar or Outlook Calendar, great. You're potentially someone that you should use Fireflies, and which is a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And then we start diving a little bit deeper into, okay, who are our Salesforce users? Who are folks that use tools like, HubSpot CRM or Zoho CRM? Great. We understand that customer segment. We know how to go reach out to those customer segments, and we know how we can provide value to those people. And then we look at other things that these people do, right? Okay, looks like they use scheduling tools like X.AI or Calendly or these other sort of tools. Great. If they're using those tools, they make sense to work with Fireflies. So we really look at what is our team, like the customer's current stack, and then what is the size of that they're from. And ultimately, you don't know all these on day one. Sometimes, yes, it makes sense to just open it up and see what the heck happens. But that's like throwing a bunch of darts and hoping something sticks. Mm-hmm. Something we could have done better was really look at from one successful customer and try to like step back and see how many other customers within that role, within that domain, within that industry are there, and we could start scaling it up, right? Because right now, a lot of the folks that use it are typically folks that have inside sales teams or have a lot of conferencing calls, right? Whereas if you're like a real estate agent, you might have in-person meetings and do other things like that. And so that might not be a good fit just yet for us because we don't support some of those capabilities. Just knowing your limitations on terms of who you can support, I think is also really important, because the temptation is we're everything for everybody. And when you're like that, you're actually nobody. You're nothing for anybody, right? So yeah. Anyway, that's how we look at customer segment. I think that was a huge aspect to the technology, because fundamentally the technology was valuable. There's customers out there that found value from it, but there was a customer segment that was just obsessed with it. And then we doubled down on that customer segment. Yeah.
That's awesome. And as far as what's been, what's the one thing that is currently on the roadmap that you're working on, not necessarily on a product standpoint, but just as a company as a whole?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of things that our team's working on. Is there anything specific that you would be interested in learning more about? Maybe I always see, the best thing is asking your customers versus you trying to say things. So I'm just curious, what that would entail. Are we talking about features? Are we talking about capabilities?
Just as far as the company, right? What's if you could do one thing right now, what would that thing be? And think
interesting. All right.
Anything goes, really.
Right. We actually think a little bit more holistically on the, from the ground level, where we look at what makes our customers successful is if we can get into every one of those meetings and then do the work for them. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, people use all sorts of different tools, right? Some will use web conferencing systems. Some will record their calls on some mobile app. And so we enabled an upload feature where you can upload stuff to Fireflies. People will use different sort of power dialers and other sort of systems. And so for us, our number one goal is to make the system as flexible as possible so that no matter what tools you're using, Fireflies can connect and go do that efficiently and effectively for you. So that's a lot of work we're doing, right? And I think we're going to continue to do that. And maybe another thing that we like to start thinking about from a larger scale is, great, now you have all this data, right? What can we do with that data for you? And what do you want to do with that data, right? And people want to push that data to different systems. People want to do all sorts of different things with it. And so just starting to understand a little bit more about how people want to use it. There are things that people want to do with the assistant or the calling system, right? And so we look at a couple different things from that angle. But our number one goal is very quickly, like, how do we get into every single conversation that you're potentially having? And then how do we enable success for you there? And then once everything is there, how can we start helping you do different creative things with that data? And so we'll have, on the second part, we'll have some interesting stuff coming out in the near future that I think a lot of customers have already come with weird, interesting workarounds to use data in that way. And they're just helping us figure out, okay, these are things that we can do to improve it. We can go and build it. So those are some things that we're doing right now, actually. Yeah.
That's awesome. And let's see here. What's one thing, we're getting kind of close to the time here. What's one thing that you would recommend or advise, anyone that is in a similar position to yourself as far as growing a company and really, having a product that solves a pain point?
Yeah, I think that I'm pretty early in my entrepreneurship career to give like big, grandiose advice, but from what I've seen and mistakes that I've made and our team has made and what we've kind of figured out, there's ultimately that 10x problem you want to be solving for people. And a lot of times you can guess, you can try to be a Steve Jobs, but realistically, intuition only gets you so far. In the early days, you have to have a bunch of hypotheses and start testing, right? Is this going to work? Is this going to work? Is this going to work? And then you need to be able to ruthlessly like cross them out and keep going to different things. I think the best thing anyone possibly can do in the early days, right, before they even build a product or write a line of code, is validating it, right, with actual like customer interviews. And in those interviews, your job is not to go sell the product, but to be actually able to listen and say, like, what are the problems that you have, and dig deeper and deeper and deeper until a customer tells you, this, if I theoretically had this magical wand, it would solve my product, right, or my problem. And I think that's super important. And what ends up happening as entrepreneurs, we get so passionate about the solution, we don't think hard enough about the problem, and then we try to convince ourselves that the solution we have is 10x, but maybe it's only 2x, right? And I think one of the things I've learned as I started using Fireflies to record and transcribe and all my calls is I realized, holy crap, I'm talking way too much. I need to shut up and listen. And then second thing is, he said something, or this person said something on this call that totally flew over me because I was thinking of how to respond to something else that was in my mind. Mm-hmm. And we end up, right, like a lot of times we, listen to reply. We don't listen and actually process and understand what someone is saying, whether it's in person or whether it's in meetings. And so I think being able to actually have a meeting to listen and understand versus listen and reply is like such a huge aspect for founders. And we need to kind of contain our passion and then just be able to see if multiple customers can actually point us in the right direction. Because it's actually really bad if what ends up happening is you think you know what you're doing and then you go build something and then 6 months later, 5 months later, you've released it and then you wasted a bunch of money building a service or product that has no value add or fit, right? I would honestly say go find your first customers and then go build the product. That usually works out well. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And what about, self-education and really getting a mentor and things like that? Where does that fall in?
Yeah, I think SaaS has come a long way. To be honest, maybe like 4 years ago, I had no idea about Salesforce and what a CRM did, right? And I've come a long way from that time because I think there's also a lot of hype and noise. There's hundreds of sales tools, sales automation tools, and all that stuff. So I'm early enough in my career where I had to just voraciously read and understand. If you look at the marketing tech stack, right? We work on sales tech and marketing tech. There's thousands and thousands of tools, and you're like, what actually matters to people? And companies are buying hundreds of tools for their sales reps, and how many do they actually end up using? And so these were things that where it was overwhelming in the beginning, but I just literally, I was reading, from other companies that wrote blogs, other companies that were writing white papers, starting to understand as much as possible about this. And then from an engineering side, right, there's a bunch of, white papers on deep learning and machine learning that we end up going and reading about and understanding. So that works out pretty well. So I think you have to constantly be reading what's out there, but you don't want it to get to a point where you have too much information but not enough to take action, right?
Absolutely.
And so those are some things that I would think about. There's great mentors out there. Like I think Jason Lemkin's probably fantastic when it comes to SaaSer and building, business. So everyone should be checking out whoever's building a SaaS company. And I think that there are some great companies out there that are breaking the conventional mold in terms of what a SaaS or B2B company needs to be in terms of how they build the business. So that's also important. Not everyone needs to go hire 100 sales reps and then go build a business, right? Upfront. Unless you have like $20 million, $50 million of cash, great, go for it. But a lot of times you have to think about things that are fundamentally different. And also all the advice you get, if you're getting advice from someone that's killed it in later stage, like at a high growth, they're a Series C company, those tactics are not going to work for you when you're trying to get to your first 10 or first 50 customers. All right. And so that is really, really important to be able to put all that together and realize, is this advice actually relevant to me from the perspective of the stage that my company's at? And yeah, so those are things that you would want to definitely be able to think more about. Yeah.
Awesome. And with that being said, what is your favorite book and business?
There is one book that I've read recently. I want to get the exact name for you. Actually, let me actually look it up.
Okay.
So that I can see it. I believe it's Monetizing Innovation. I'll double check on that, but that was a really good book. Usually I don't read books necessarily as much as, but yeah, I believe it's Monetizing Innovation. I'll take a quick look at that, but that's usually a really good book that I would recommend people, because for us, pricing was such a huge aspect. How pricing works, utility, all that stuff that helps. That book helped teach a lot. People talk about the more, everyone talks about crossing the chasm and things like that. I mean, I've read it briefly, I've skimmed through things, but it really depends on the business you're in, the things that you're trying to solve. So fundamentally, I think that book helped us a lot. Yeah.
Awesome. I'll definitely have to check that out. And Krish, do you have any questions for myself?
No, I'm just very curious. Like, you've probably talked to a lot of founders and a lot of folks. And I'm curious, like, what sort of, what sort of thoughts or that you have on the SaaS space based on all these conversations that you've tended to have. Yeah.
Well, and this is actually something that came up in the last interview, also just about an hour ago here. So essentially, the one thing that really stood out to me about everything, and not just the SaaS company, but I think overall, and it is SaaS specific, right? Because I feel like a lot of people try to automate and scale as many things as possible, whether that is onboarding or talking to people or whatever it is. And I actually brought this up earlier, right? So it is doing things that you can't scale and just being more personal with individuals and your customers. And I think that's something that society as a whole is kind of missing the point, and they tend to overlook it, right? And essentially, and every transaction is a relationship being built, whether you think of it that way or not. But the moment someone decides to sign up for Fireflies, that's a relationship being built, and you have to maintain it. You have to keep nurturing it and giving it what it wants, right? In order for it to give you what you want, whether you want to think of it as a transaction or any other way. But essentially just being there, listening to people, seeing what it is that they want, and just doing, again, the non-scalable. I think that's going to allow you to maintain a very low churn rate, whether you're already in the single digits like yourself, or you're at a higher digits, right? But I think being personable and creating relationships, it's essentially why we're doing these things, right? Building a business and helping individuals have better sales calls, become more productive, whatever the tool may be. I think understanding where the people are coming from and what they need and what they want out of your product is extremely important. And it's not always going to be as simple as putting a video and then showing them how to onboard themselves or sending an email, right? I think hopping on a phone call and getting as much information as possible from them is very important.
Yep. I think you've hit it on especially in the early days, you want to be like friends with all your customers and
Absolutely.
be able to be on a texting basis with them. And I think that helps get feedback faster. The faster you can get feedback, the faster you iterate, the faster you get to product market fit. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And so I think that's all for today. And again, Krish, I'm very appreciative of you taking the time out of your day to hop on this interview with me and tell us a little bit more about FireFlies AI. And honestly, it's a very, very cool product. And I think anyone that has a sales team or is in sales or is selling some sort of product or customer service, whatever it may be, should check it out. There's a lot of potential with your company and what you're doing right now. But I think, and this, again, this is very early stage. I'm assuming there's lots of things coming from you guys that are going to be pretty awesome. So I'm definitely going to keep my eyes out for whatever you guys come out, and maybe I'll even become a customer of yours. So again, thank you for hopping on this phone call. And where can people find you online?
Yeah, so they can find our company at FireFlies.ai. They can find me on LinkedIn, Krish Ramineni, and they can also find me on Twitter. Typically, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and I'm always like sharing stuff people are talking about in the space, in the SaaS space. And then, yeah, I'm part of a couple of the SaaS Facebook groups as well. That's where you can find me.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. And again, thank you to everyone that's listening to the SaaS AdLab podcast. You can find myself on Instagram. I don't really post much, but that's really the only thing that I have other than the Facebook group. So that's going to be camacho.ftm and also Fantom.agency. If you're a SaaS founder, entrepreneur, or anything in that area, make sure you join the group. And if you want to be on the podcast, just submit the application, let us know, and we'll have you on here. Again, thank you, Krish, for joining us. And I challenge every single one of you to go and do something that's going to help you become a better person, become a better individual, and just help people around you. So again, thank you very much for being here with us today, and appreciate the time.
Great. No, thank you for having me. All righty. Thanks.
Bye-bye.